This story is based mainly on Daniel chapter 3, in the days when the empire of Babylon stretched its shadow over nations, cities, languages, and kings. There are moments in history when the whole world seems to move in one direction. A command is given. A sound is heard. A crowd lowers itself to the ground, and in that single movement, obedience becomes visible. Fear becomes visible. Loyalty becomes visible. But sometimes, what changes the course of a story is not the movement of the crowd. It is the stillness of the few who refuse to bow. Long before the fire was heated, long before the king's face was filled with rage, long before the furnace became the place where faith would be tested before an empire, 3 young men had already learned that their lives did not belong to Babylon. Their names were Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. But Babylon called them Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They had been taken from Judah, carried far from the land of their fathers, far from the temple, far from the hills and songs of Jerusalem. They had been brought into a foreign world where everything was designed to reshape them. New language, new customs, new education, new names. Babylon did not only conquer cities, it tried to conquer memory. It tried to teach captives to forget who they were, who they served, and where their hope truly came from. Yet even in a palace filled with foreign gods and gold and wealth, there were some things Babylon could not take. It could change their surroundings, but not their covenant. It could give them new names, but not a new God. It could place them in the service of a king, but it could not own their worship. And this is where the story becomes more than ancient history. It becomes a mirror, because every generation has its own Babylon. Every generation knows the pressure to bow, not always before a golden statue, not always before a visible idol standing on a plain. Sometimes the pressure comes through fear, comfort, success, approval, silence, or survival. Sometimes it comes when everyone else has already lowered themselves, and the only thing left to decide is whether you will remain standing alone. King Nebuchadnezzar was the ruler of Babylon, a man of enormous power and ambition. His empire was not small, and his confidence was not quiet. He had seen kingdoms fall. He had taken treasures from distant lands. He had watched strong cities become dust under the weight of his armies. In the eyes of the world, his word carried the force of destiny. When Nebuchadnezzar commanded, people moved. When he spoke, officials listened. When he built, nations noticed. And in Daniel chapter 3, he built something that no one could ignore. The king made an image of gold. The Bible tells us it was set up in the plain of Dura, in the province of Babylon. It rose high above the land, a massive figure shining beneath the sun, visible from a distance, impossible to mistake. It was not hidden inside a temple. It was not private. It was not small. It stood in the open, where all could gather and all could see. The image was a statement. It spoke without words. It declared the greatness of the king, the unity of the empire, and the power of the throne. It called every province, every official, every ruler, every governor, every counselor, every treasurer, every judge, every magistrate, and every leader to one place. Babylon would not only be ruled by law, it would be united by worship. The king sent word for the officials of the empire to come to the dedication of the image, and they came. From across the province, they gathered on the plain, men of position, men of influence, men whose lives depended on knowing when to speak, when to remain silent, and when to obey. The day must have been filled with spectacle. The golden image stood before them, towering over the crowd. Around it, the symbols of Babylon's glory surrounded the people. The king's authority hung in the air. No one needed to ask what was expected. The command would soon be made plain. Then the herald cried aloud. The message was simple, public, and absolute. When the people heard the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, psaltery, and every kind of music, they were to fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And whoever did not fall down and worship would immediately be thrown into the burning fiery furnace. This was not an invitation. It was not a discussion. It was not a matter of private opinion. The king had created a moment where every person's loyalty would be revealed in public. The sound of the music would become the signal. The crowd would move together. The empire would bow together, and anyone left standing would be seen. This is one of the reasons the story still holds such power. The test was not hidden. It was not quiet. It did not happen in a room where a person could pretend later that no one understood. It happened in the open, before the eyes of officials, rulers, and servants of the king. The furnace was not a distant threat. It was part of the command. Bow and live. Stand and burn. That is how Babylon tried to make worship simple, not through conviction, but through fear, not through truth, but through pressure, not through love, but through terror. And then the music began. The sound moved across the plain, horns and flutes, strings and instruments, one great wave of sound calling the empire to lower itself before the image. And the people bowed. Officials bowed. Leaders bowed. Men who had commanded others now bent themselves to the ground. The plain that had been filled with standing figures became a field of lowered bodies. From a distance, it may have looked like perfect unity. But unity created by fear is not the same as faithfulness. A crowd can move together and still be lost. A nation can bow together and still be wrong. And as the music filled the air, as thousands obeyed the king's command, as the golden image stood above them all, 3 men did not bow. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego remained standing. The Bible does not describe their faces in that moment. It does not tell us whether their hands trembled or whether their hearts were racing. It does not tell us whether they looked at one another before refusing or whether the decision had been settled long before the music began. But their bodies told the truth. They would not bow. They had served in Babylon. They had worked under Babylonian authority. They had learned the language. They had lived in the empire. But worship belonged to God alone. And there is a difference between living in Babylon and belonging to Babylon. There is a difference between serving in a foreign land and surrendering your soul to its idols. There is a difference between respecting authority and giving to human power what belongs only to the Lord. Their refusal was not loud. It did not begin as a speech. They did not gather a crowd. They did not lift weapons. They did not rebel against the king with violence. They simply stood, and sometimes standing is the loudest testimony a faithful person can give. The eyes of Babylon were trained to notice disobedience. Certain Chaldeans came forward and accused the Jews. They approached King Nebuchadnezzar and reminded him of his own command. They knew the law. They knew the consequence. They knew how to present the matter in a way that would awaken the king's anger. They said that certain Jews whom the king had appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon had not paid attention to him. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did not serve the king's gods, and they did not worship the golden image he had set up. The accusation was precise. It was also personal. They did not merely say 3 men had disobeyed. They reminded the king that these were men he had placed in positions of responsibility. They were men who had been elevated within his system. They were men who owed their public status in human terms to the king's appointment. In other words, they made their faithfulness sound like betrayal. That is often how the world describes obedience to God when it refuses to serve an idol. It calls conviction arrogance. It calls faithfulness rebellion. It calls worship narrowness. It calls courage disrespect. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were not trying to dishonor the king. They were trying to honor the Lord. And the two came into conflict because the king demanded what no earthly ruler has the right to own: worship. When Nebuchadnezzar heard the report, he was furious. The Bible says he commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought before him. Now the scene changed. They were no longer simply standing on the plain. They were standing before the king, the man who held power over their positions, their futures, and their lives now looked directly at them. The accusation had become confrontation. Nebuchadnezzar asked if it was true. He did not immediately throw them into the furnace. He gave them another opportunity. Perhaps this was because they had held office. Perhaps because he wanted public submission more than immediate punishment. Perhaps because he could not imagine that any man would choose death over obedience to his command. He repeated the terms. If they were ready, when they heard the music, they could fall down and worship the image he had made. But if they did not worship, they would be thrown immediately into the burning fiery furnace. Then the king asked a question that revealed the true heart of the conflict. Who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? This was more than anger. This was pride standing at full height. Nebuchadnezzar saw the issue not only as political disobedience, but as a challenge between his power and their God. In his mind, the furnace was final. His command was final. His hand was final. He could not imagine a deliverer greater than his authority. But the story of Scripture is filled with moments when human power asks the wrong question. Pharaoh once asked, "Who is the Lord?" Goliath once mocked the armies of Israel. Kings and rulers have often mistaken patience for weakness and earthly authority for ultimate authority. Nebuchadnezzar asked who could deliver them from his hand. He did not yet understand that his own hand was held in the hand of God. And now Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego spoke. Their answer is one of the most powerful declarations of faith in the Bible. They told the king that they did not need to answer him carefully in this matter. If it was so, their God whom they served was able to deliver them from the burning fiery furnace, and he would deliver them out of the king's hand. But then they said something even greater. But if not, they wanted the king to know that they would not serve his gods or worship the golden image he had set up. But if not, those 3 words carry the weight of mature faith. They believed God was able to deliver them. They did not doubt his power. They did not lower his greatness. They did not imagine the furnace was too hot for him, or the king too strong for him, or the empire too great for him. They knew God could save, but their obedience was not dependent on the outcome. They did not say, "We will be faithful if God rescues us." They did not say, "We will stand if we are guaranteed to survive." They did not say, "We will trust if the miracle comes before the fire." They said, "Our God is able, but if not, we will not bow." This is faith that has passed beyond transaction. It does not treat God as a means of escape. It trusts Him as Lord, whether escape comes or not. It is one thing to praise God after deliverance. It is another thing to remain faithful before knowing how the story will end. And this is why their answer still speaks so deeply to the human heart. Many people can believe when the path is clear. Many can trust when the door is open. Many can stand when the danger is far away. But what happens when the furnace is in front of you? What happens when obedience may cost you something? What happens when faithfulness does not come with a promise that life will become easier? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego teach us that true faith is not built on controlling the outcome. It is built on knowing the character of God. And if you are still watching this story unfold, stay with it closely. Because the heart of this account is not only that God can deliver from the fire, it is that God is worthy of worship, even before the fire is removed. Nebuchadnezzar did not receive their answer with humility. The Bible says he was filled with fury, and the expression of his face changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The king who had offered them a second chance now became the king who wanted the furnace hotter than before. He commanded that it be heated 7 times more than it was usually heated. His rage tried to make the punishment greater. His pride tried to make the threat unforgettable. He ordered some of the mighty men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and cast them into the burning fiery furnace. So the 3 men were bound in their cloaks, tunics, hats, and other garments. They were tied and carried toward the fire. There is a quiet sorrow in that moment. These were faithful men. They had not stolen. They had not betrayed. They had not harmed the king. They had simply refused to worship what was false. Yet they were bound like criminals. Their loyalty to God had brought them not applause but accusation, not safety but danger, not promotion but the furnace. This is where many people misunderstand faith. They think faithfulness always prevents the fire. But in Daniel 3, faithfulness leads them directly toward it. The presence of trouble does not always mean the absence of God. Sometimes the path of obedience runs straight through the place we most wanted to avoid. The furnace burned with such intensity, and the king's command was so urgent that the men who carried Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were overcome by the flames as they approached. The soldiers fell. The fire consumed the strong men of the army. The furnace was not symbolic. The danger was real. The cost was real. The heat was real. And bound hand and foot, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego fell into the burning fiery furnace. For a moment, it may have seemed that Babylon had won. The music had played. The crowd had bowed. The king had commanded. The faithful had been thrown into the fire. From the outside, the story looked finished. But heaven does not end a story where Babylon thinks it ends. Nebuchadnezzar was watching. The king, who had asked what God could deliver them now, looked into the furnace expecting to see the result of his own power. He expected the fire to prove him right. He expected the flames to confirm his authority. Instead, he was Astonished, he rose up in haste. He spoke to his counselors and asked, "Did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire?" They answered that this was true. Then he said that he saw 4 men, unbound, walking in the midst of the fire, and they were not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th was like a son of the gods. This is the turning point. The men who had been bound were now free. The men who had fallen were now walking. The men who had been sentenced were now alive, and they were not alone. The furnace had become the place of revelation. Babylon had thrown in 3, but the king saw 4. The fire that was meant to destroy them became the place where another presence appeared with them. Scripture does not explain every mystery of that 4th figure in the way our curiosity might desire. Nebuchadnezzar described what he saw according to his own understanding. Later, he would speak of God sending his angel and delivering his servants. But the message is clear. God was with them in the fire, not merely watching from a distance, not merely remembering them from heaven, not merely waiting outside the furnace until the danger passed. He was present with them in the midst of it. This does not mean God always delivers his people from suffering in the same visible way. The Bible never teaches that faithfulness makes every earthly danger disappear. Many faithful servants have suffered. Many have endured loss. Many have died with hope still fixed on God. But Daniel 3 shows us something eternal. The power of the king was limited. The power of the fire was limited. The power of accusation was limited. The presence of God was not. The furnace could burn the ropes, but it could not burn the servants of God. The command of the king could put them into the fire, but it could not remove God from being with them. Their enemies could accuse them, bind them, and throw them in, but they could not decide what God would do inside the flames. And this is one of the great comforts of the story. Sometimes the fire does not destroy what belongs to God. Sometimes it only burns away what had bound you. They had entered the furnace tied. They were seen walking free. The same place that was meant to be their end became the place where their bonds were gone. Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the burning fiery furnace. The king who had ordered them in now called them out. He said, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here." The language had changed. Before, he had asked what God could deliver them from his hand. Now he called them servants of the Most High God. The furnace had preached a sermon without words. The king had seen enough to know that their God was not like the gods of Babylon. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out from the fire. Then the satraps, prefects, governors, and the king's counselors gathered together. These were the same kinds of officials who had come to honor the image. These were the representatives of the empire. These were witnesses, and they saw that the fire had not had power over the bodies of these men. The hair of their heads was not singed, their cloaks were not harmed, there was not even the smell of fire on them. The deliverance was complete, not partial, not hidden, not explainable by strength, skill, or luck. The men who had been thrown into the furnace came out untouched by what should have consumed them. And every person gathered there had to face the truth. The golden image had stood tall, but it could not save. The king had spoken loudly, but he was not supreme. The furnace had burned fiercely, but it was not final. The God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had delivered his servants. Nebuchadnezzar answered and blessed the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. who had sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him. He recognized that they had set aside the king's command and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God. That phrase matters. They yielded up their bodies. They were not reckless. They were not seeking death. They were not trying to create drama. But they had decided that worship was worth more than survival under idolatry. They would rather enter the furnace with God than bow before an idol without him. And in the end, the king made a decree that no people, nation, or language should speak against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then the king promoted them in the province of Babylon. The story ends with honor. But we should not rush there too quickly, because the promotion at the end was not the foundation of their faith. They did not know promotion was coming when they refused to bow. They did not know deliverance would come in a visible miracle. They did not know the king would change his words. They only knew that God was God, and that was enough. In many ways, the entire story turns on what happened before the miracle. The miracle shows God's power, but their refusal shows their faith. The fourth figure in the fire reveals divine presence, but the three men standing before the music reveals human obedience, and faithfulness before the miracle is often where the deepest testimony is formed. If the story had ended with their death, God would still have been worthy. That is what they believed. That is what "but if not" means. It means the throne of God does not depend on the outcome I desire. It means the goodness of God is not erased by the suffering I do not understand. It means obedience is not a bargain, but surrender. This is difficult, and it is honest. The Bible does not give us shallow faith. It does not pretend that God's people never face danger. It does not hide the furnace. It does not remove the fear. It does not say that every righteous person avoids pain. Instead, it shows us something stronger. God is faithful in the fire. For the viewer who feels surrounded by pressure, this story speaks gently but firmly. There may be places in your life where the music is playing and the crowd has already bowed. There may be expectations that seem impossible to resist. There may be fear of losing approval, position, comfort, friendship, or security. And the temptation may not feel dramatic. It may feel reasonable. Just bow once. Just stay quiet. Just do what everyone else is doing. Just survive. But the soul is shaped by what it worships. What you bow to will eventually claim you. And what you refuse to bow to may reveal who you truly serve. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego remind us that faithfulness can be quiet and still be powerful. They did not need to control the crowd. They did not need to defeat Babylon by force. They did not need to prove themselves with many words. They stood, and God was able to make their standing speak to an empire. If this story is speaking to you, take a moment to reflect on where courage is needed in your own life. And if you're watching with someone else in mind, someone who needs strength, someone facing pressure, someone trying to remain faithful in a difficult place, share this story with them. Sometimes a person only needs to be reminded that they are not alone in the fire. There is another detail that deserves our attention. The king's command was designed to make disobedience impossible. Everything about the moment worked against them. The size of the image, the authority of the king, the presence of officials, the sound of music, the movement of the crowd, the threat of death. This was not a private test of belief. It was a public test of worship. And public pressure has a way of making wrong choices feel normal. When everyone bows, standing feels extreme. When everyone is silent, speaking truth feels dangerous. When everyone compromises, obedience feels lonely. But truth is not decided by the crowd. The number of people bowing does not make the idol worthy. The volume of the music does not make the command righteous. The power of the king does not make false worship acceptable. This is why the story remains so relevant. We may not stand before Nebuchadnezzar's image, but we live in a world filled with commands that ask for the soul. Some ask for fear. Some ask for pride. Some ask for compromise. Some ask for hatred. Some ask for despair. Some ask for the worship of success, pleasure, power, or self, and each one promises safety if we bow. But the people of God are called to know the difference between respect and worship, between service and surrender, between living in a culture and being owned by it. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had responsibilities in Babylon. They were not hiding from the world. They were not useless to the society around them. They served with wisdom and excellence. But when Babylon crossed the line from governance into worship, they stopped. There are times when faithfulness says yes. Yes to service, yes to patience, yes to humility, yes to work, yes to peace. And there are times when faithfulness says no. No to idols, no to false worship, no to fear as master, no to giving ultimate loyalty to anyone but God. Their no was costly, but it was holy. And their refusal teaches us that the most faithful word a person can speak may sometimes be a respectful, unwavering no. Nebuchadnezzar had asked, "Who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands?" It is one of the most revealing questions in the chapter. The king believed power belonged to the person who could threaten the body. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego knew that ultimate power belonged to the God who held the soul. The king could command a furnace. God could command the fire. The king could bind their hands. God could loose them in the flames. The king could call officials to witness an execution. God could turn the same witnesses into observers of deliverance. This is the wisdom of heaven against the pride of earth. Human power often looks greatest right before it is humbled. The image was tall. The crowd was large. The furnace was hot. The king was furious, but none of it was greater than God. And the beautiful thing is that the three men did not need to shout this truth to make it real. They trusted it. Their answer to the king was not frantic. It was steady. They did not beg for time. They did not negotiate a compromise. They did not insult the king. They did not pretend the danger was imaginary. They simply confessed what was true. God is able. God can deliver. But even if he does not, we will not worship the image. That kind of faith is deeply grounded. It is not emotional excitement that disappears when the music stops. It is not confidence built on comfort. It is not courage born from ignorance. They understood the consequence, and they remained faithful anyway. This is not the faith of people who think obedience is easy. This is the faith of people who know God is worthy. For many viewers, this may be the part of the story that matters most, because life does not always bring us to dramatic furnaces. Sometimes the fire is a season of loss. Sometimes it is a difficult responsibility. Sometimes it is pressure from people who do not understand your convictions. Sometimes it is the loneliness of doing what is right when no one applauds. And in those places, the question is not only, will God remove this? The question is also, will I trust him here? The miracle of Daniel 3 is not only that God delivered them from death, it is that they were not alone before deliverance came. The fourth figure appeared in the fire, not before it. This does not mean God was absent before. God was with them when they stood, when they answered, when they were bound, and when they were thrown in. But the king saw the presence in the furnace. Sometimes God's nearness becomes most visible in the very place we feared. The place that looked like abandonment becomes the place of companionship. The place that looked like defeat becomes the place of witness. The place that looked like the end becomes the place where God reveals that he has not left. This is why the story must not be reduced to a simple message of escape. It is deeper than that. God did not keep them from being accused. He did not keep them from standing before the angry king. He did not keep them from being bound. He did not keep them from being thrown into the furnace. But he was with them there, and he brought them out in a way that made even their enemies see his power. There are testimonies formed by avoidance, and there are testimonies formed by endurance. Daniel 3 gives us endurance touched by miracle. When they came out, the fire had no power over them. Not even the smell remained. That detail is tender and astonishing, because fire usually leaves evidence. It marks what it touches. It clings to clothing. It changes appearance. It leaves a trace. But God's deliverance was so complete that the fire could not claim even the scent of them. What Babylon meant to use as their identity, God refused to let remain on them. They would not be remembered as men destroyed by the furnace. They would be remembered as servants of the Most High God. And perhaps that is a word for someone who has walked through something painful. The fire may have been real, but it does not have to define you. The accusation may have been real, but it does not have to name you. The pressure may have been real, but it does not have to own you. The God who was able to deliver them is still able to hold his people. Not every story unfolds with the same visible miracle. We must be honest about that. Faithful people have faced suffering throughout the history of Scripture and throughout the history of the world. Some were delivered from danger. Others were faithful through danger. Some saw rescue in this life. Others held their hope beyond it. But the foundation remains the same. God is worthy. God is present. God is sovereign. God is not defeated by the furnace, and no earthly king has the final word over those who belong to him. This is what Nebuchadnezzar had to learn. His empire was great, but not ultimate. His command was loud, but not eternal. His image was golden, but lifeless. His furnace was hot, but limited. The God of heaven was beyond all of it, and the men he thought he could break became the men through whom he saw a greater king. That is the irony of the story. Nebuchadnezzar built an image to display his glory, but the event displayed the glory of God. He gathered officials to honor his power, but they witnessed God's power. He threatened the faithful to force worship, but their faithfulness caused the true God to be honored. Human pride often tries to use fear to build a throne. God can use faithful obedience to reveal that the throne was never empty. There is also something deeply moving about the fact that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stood together. The Bible presents them as three men sharing the same test, the same accusation, the same answer, and the same furnace. Faithfulness can be lonely, but it is a gift when the faithful do not stand alone. They had one another. When the music played, each man could see that the others remained standing. When the accusation came, they faced it together. When the king questioned them, they answered with one voice. When they were bound together. When they were thrown into the furnace, they entered together. And when the king looked in, he saw them walking together with another in their midst. There is strength in holy companionship. A faithful friend can remind you who you are when the empire tries to rename you. A faithful friend can stand beside you when pressure rises. A faithful friend can help you remember that obedience is worth more than approval. This does not mean every believer will always have companions in every trial. Sometimes a person must stand with God when no human friend is beside them. But this story shows the beauty of shared courage. And for a channel like this, for a viewer watching quietly at home, perhaps the invitation is simple. Do not only ask for faith that survives alone. Also, ask for the wisdom to stand with others who refuse to bow, because courage can be strengthened in community, and faithfulness can echo when more than one voice says, "We will not worship the image." If this story is helping you see faith in a deeper way, consider leaving a comment with one phrase, "But if not." It is a small phrase, but it carries a powerful confession. And if you want more cinematic Bible stories told with reverence and depth, subscribing helps this channel continue bringing these accounts to life for viewers who still need to hear them. Now return to the plain of Dura for a moment. Imagine the image still shining. Imagine the crowd still remembering the fire. Imagine officials whispering about what they had seen. The day began with a command to worship gold. It ended with a pagan king blessing the God of Israel. The day began with music designed to make everyone bow. It ended with 3 men standing as living witnesses. The day began with fear. It ended with astonishment. This is how God can overturn the meaning of a moment. The same event that enemies planned for shame became a testimony. The same furnace meant for execution became a place of divine presence. The same king who mocked deliverance became the king who acknowledged it. And the same men who were accused of dishonor became honored because they trusted God. The story does not tell us what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said to each other after they came out. It does not tell us whether they slept that night or whether the memory of the flames stayed with them. It does not tell us how often they thought back to the 4th figure walking with them in the fire. But it does leave us with their testimony. They trusted God. They refused idolatry. They yielded their bodies rather than betray their worship. And God delivered them. For the original readers, this story would have carried enormous meaning. God's people knew what exile felt like. They knew what it meant to live under foreign power. They knew the pain of being far from Jerusalem. They knew the temptation to wonder whether Babylon was stronger than the promises of God. Daniel 3 answered with fire, not with an argument written in the sky, but with a miracle in the furnace. The Lord was not absent from exile. He was not limited to the land. He was not defeated by Babylon. He was able to preserve his servants even under the rule of a foreign king. This mattered then. It matters now. Because many people know what it feels like to live in a place where faith feels outnumbered. Many know what it means to carry convictions into rooms where those convictions are not welcomed. Many know the pressure to make faith private, silent, harmless, and invisible. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego show that there are moments when faith must become visible, not to perform, not to impress, not to provoke, but because obedience requires it. They did not stand because they loved conflict. They stood because they loved God. That distinction matters. Faithfulness is not the same as pride. Courage is not the same as aggression. Refusing to bow does not require hatred toward those who do. The three men spoke respectfully, but firmly. They did not curse the king. They did not mock Babylon. They did not boast in themselves. Their confidence was not in their own strength. Their confidence was in God. That is what made their courage clean. They were not trying to win an argument. They were trying to remain faithful. And that is often where true spiritual courage begins. Not in the desire to appear strong, but in the desire not to betray the one who is worthy. The golden image has long since vanished from the plain of Dura. The music of Babylon no longer echoes across that field. The officials who bowed have returned to dust. The furnace no longer burns. Nebuchadnezzar's empire has fallen, but the testimony of three men still stands. That is the difference between the glory of human pride and the glory of God. Babylon could build tall, but not eternal. Babylon could threaten loudly, but not finally. Babylon could command bodies, but not command worship from faithful hearts. The kingdom of man rises and falls. The word of God remains. And so the story continues to speak. When the music plays, remember who you worship. When the crowd bows, remember who is worthy. When the furnace waits, remember that God is able. And if the deliverance does not come in the way you hoped, remember the words that have strengthened generations of believers. But if not, if we will not bow, this is not stubbornness. It is surrender. It is not denial. It is trust. It is not confidence that life will always be easy. It is confidence that God will always be God. The great miracle of Daniel 3 is not only that three men survived a furnace. It is that the Lord revealed His power in the place where human pride believed it had absolute control. The king could make a statue, but he could not make it divine. He could command worship, but he could not deserve it. He could heat the furnace, but he could not rule over the presence of God. He could throw faithful men into the flames, but he could not stop heaven from meeting them there. And once God was with them in the fire, Babylon's power was exposed. The ropes burned. The men walked. The king trembled with astonishment. The witnesses gathered. The servants came out, and the smell of fire was not on them. There is a holy beauty in that ending. They did not come out boasting in themselves. They came out as evidence. Their bodies became testimony. Their survival became proclamation. Their freedom became proof that the Lord had acted. And the king himself had to speak of the God who delivered them. This does not mean Nebuchadnezzar fully understood everything about the Lord in that moment, but it does mean he had seen something his power could not explain. The faithful witness of three exiles had become a revelation inside the most powerful empire of their world. That is what God can do with obedience. He can take a hidden conviction and make it visible. He can take a lonely stand and make it a testimony. He can take a furnace and make it a sanctuary. He can take what was meant to destroy and use it to reveal his presence. The question left for us is not simply whether we admire Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Admiration is easy from a distance. The deeper question is whether we are willing to learn from them. Where are the golden images in our own time? Where does fear ask for worship? Where does comfort ask for compromise? Where does the desire for approval ask us to bend lower than we should? Where has the music become so familiar that we barely notice when we bow? These questions are not meant to create despair. They are meant to awaken faithfulness, because the God who sustained his servants then is still worthy now. The same Lord who ruled over Babylon rules over every age. The same God who is able to deliver from the furnace is able to strengthen his people in the trials they face today. And the same truth remains. Worship belongs to God alone. As this story comes to its close, picture them one final time. 3 men standing when the world around them bowed. 3 men answering a king without fear, controlling their words. 3 men bound and thrown into the fire. 4 figures walking in the flames. The king rising in astonishment. The servants of God coming out alive. No wound from the fire, no damage to their garments, no smell of smoke, only testimony, only wonder, only the silent evidence that God had been with them. This is why the story endures. It is not merely about courage. It is about the God who is worthy of courage. It is not merely about refusing an idol. It is about belonging to the living God. It is not merely about surviving the fire. It is about discovering that even there, in the place of greatest danger, the faithful are not forgotten. So, when the pressure rises, remember the plain of Dura. When obedience feels costly, remember their answer. When the future is uncertain, remember that faith does not need to know every outcome in order to remain true. When fear asks you to bow, remember the 4th figure in the fire. And when you feel alone, remember that the eyes of Babylon did not see the whole story until the furnace was already burning. God was not absent. God was not defeated. God was not late. He was there. And if this story has strengthened your faith, take a moment before you leave to like the video, subscribe for more cinematic Bible storytelling, and share in the comments where this account touched you most. You can also continue with another story on this channel, because the scriptures are filled with moments where fear seemed powerful, but God proved greater. The fire did not have the final word. The king did not have the final word. The idol did not have the final word. God did. And 3 men who would not bow became witnesses to an empire that the Most High rules over the flames, over kings, over nations, and over every place where his people are called to stand.